This is the Bailed Out Podcast,
You have rights. Nobody knows how to deal with the bureaucracy.
where we talk bail to keep you out of jail.
The only thing that saved me each time is I wasn't drunk.
Does that mean you're a really bad driver then?
Hosted by Sean Plotkin, a multi-generational bail agent and 5-star author. And John Roraba, a non-profit founder and attorney who has helped over 20,000 families.
We're not far right, we're not far left, we're very neutral, I hope.
Bail is the balance.
John, what is justice?
That is what the court system is there to establish.
Bailed Out is brought to you in part by searchandmate.com, Turning Leaf, and Angels Bail Bonds. Now, please welcome your hosts, Sean and John.
Greetings. Welcome to the Bailed Out Podcast. We're here today with Sean Plotkin and I, John Roraba. And we have as our special guest today, Ryan Smalls, a fugitive recovery agent I've worked with for many years. We've got to go, you've got to go all over the world looking for fugitives. I've stayed at my desk and talked to you on the phone all over the world.
That's correct.
So greetings.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ryan, just out of curiosity, how many times have you gone out and had to apprehend a fugitive?
In my 18, 20 years career,
Yeah.
I really don't have a number because we don't keep track like that. It's been quite a lot.
Yeah.
Did you say it's more than a handful?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, more than a handful. Yes, sir.
And less than 1,000?
Probably
More than that.
More than that, yes.
Yeah. I'd imagine you're probably in the several hundred a year at least.
I would say about 60 to 70 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because you only get the hard ones, you know, I mean, there's a lot of people who do fugitive recovery, but when it's a difficult case, and particularly one that has global implications, one of the international cases, you've just done the most of those, for sure.
There are other people that are my up to my caliber, you might say, or my agency's caliber, but in the most cases, the sureties, the insurance companies do call me.
Absolutely.
Ryan, why do you only get the hard ones? Do they not like you?
No, I reject a lot. I reject a lot of cases. There's only so many cases. You can only be good as your last accomplishment, and that's always my feeling.
Yeah.
But
So what kind of case would you reject versus choose to take?
a case, it really doesn't matter the dollar value. Sometimes it's the crime. Sometimes it's the 11th hour, and I can't do anything at the 11th hour. Bail companies will wait till the 11th hour to say, help me, and it may be too late. An investigation takes time. When you're hunting a man, it takes a minute.
Now you had a prior career before you worked as a fugitive recovery agent. What did you do earlier in your career?
Well, you start off being a Marine.
Yeah.
That's the first step, being a real man,
Yeah.
you might say.
They're just reorganizing the Marines right now, I heard.
Yes,
There's
they
a
are.
whole other dynamic going on. It's interesting.
Yes, it is. So you start off, I came into the Marine Corps in 1972, turned around, became a military policeman, became a chaser during that time. At that time, people were going UA, unauthorized absences.
Mm-hmm.
So that became part of the hunting process in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
especially coming from New York. Then from that point, I became a criminal investigator. From there, I went to work for Naval Investigative Service, which is now NCIS.
Mm. Interesting. And then from there came over into the bail side?
Then came over here to the dark side, yes.
So I'm curious, from that experience of working on the fugitive recovery from the government side and then also on the bail side, what are some of the differences between those experiences?
Hunting a person when a person has a warrant or is running from something, it's all pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what the crime is the person's committed,
Right.
how hard they run. Sometimes misdemeanors run harder than felonies.
Right.
It depends on the mindset of the individual.
Right.
There's only one fugitive that I could say that I don't admire criminals.
Right.
But I'm here to tell you was Bolger
Right.
and
Yeah.
how he ran and kept law enforcement at bay.
Right.
A lot of people cannot do that
Right.
because you have to disassociate yourself from everything that you've ever learned in life
Yeah.
and never reach back
Right.
to mommy, daddy, friends, or what have you. That takes discipline. So that's a professional criminal to me.
Yeah. Someone
So-
who's able to handle the pressure of being a fugitive.
That's correct.
Give us a little bit of insight into that. What it's like to be on the run and trying to hide, with an active warrant.
Well, from the individuals that we arrest at times, and we always ask them, why'd you do it?
Right.
We don't ask them about the crime itself, but it's always interesting to know how hard they were running.
Right.
And how come I couldn't catch you yesterday, Vice? It took me 6 months to catch you.
Right.
And the I guess when a person runs out of the country, it's different than a person staying in his own neighborhood
Right.
where he's protected, kind of, sort of. He
Right.
does have to come out and go to the store. Depending on his relationship with his parents, they hide people.
Ah.
It's the dynamics change based on the crime, based on the person's ethnicity,
Right.
where they're originally from, their ties to the community, things of this nature.
Sure. That makes sense. What are some of the places you've gone in the world to find people?
El Salvador, Chile, Mexico, like every other day.
Right.
Those are the two main places I've hunted.
Right.
I haven't gone to Europe at all,
Right.
but mainly the South American countries.
Got it. Yeah, there's a proximity. There's more likely that if someone commits a crime here and is from there, that they just go home.
That's correct.
Is that part of the dynamic?
It is. They either go home or they have to have a home base.
Right.
And normally people that commit a crime here in the United States, this is a temporary base. Even though they wanted it to be a home base,
Right.
it turns into a temporary base when they commit a crime.
Right.
So nobody wants to be incarcerated. Nobody wants to go to jail.
Right.
So they figure they can't catch me over here.
Right.
And they go back home.
Right.
It doesn't matter their ethnicities. We had people go back from Nigeria before. Understanding that our treaties, the U.S. treaties that we govern for extradition
Right.
is so important. Sometimes people go to places that we don't have treaties with,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're able to stay.
Right. And I know, for instance, the United States won't negotiate an extradition treaty with a country that they don't feel comfortable sending our citizens to be incarcerated in.
That's
so
correct.
you have places like that we might have a good relationship, like places with like Iran or other places
Correct.
that we just, there's a negotiation that goes on between the countries and who they're allowed to bring back and who not.
Well, it depends. I mean, the marshals do a wonderful job. Our U.S. government does a wonderful job. It's like, do me a favor, I'll do you one, because they have people that run here.
Right.
And they want our U.S. government to help them out here.
Right.
You get me one, I'll get you two.
Ah.
And as a fugitive recovery person, we do the same thing.
Right.
We communicate with law enforcement abroad.
Right.
It's a little different mentality, but it all boils down to the same thing. Sometimes they'll give us a call and say, "Do you know where this guy is?" Instead of calling federal law enforcement here, they
Right.
might call me
Right.
because of our relationship, and we turn around and give them what they need.
Right. And that's what I've seen is that relationship with law enforcement, especially the higher level law enforcement, is really essential to be effective in California bail, because California is so interconnected to all of the world, and we have such big immigrant populations.
That's correct. Well, I was very fortunate. I had a lot of rabbis in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and they taught me a lot of things.
Yeah.
How to stay out of trouble, especially.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the kind of crimes that that you're more likely to pursue on an international basis?
Oh, well, right now we're seeing a large surge in sex offenses,
Yeah.
child molestation cases.
Yeah.
For some reason, we're seeing, and it doesn't matter the ethnicity, we're just seeing a large spike
Right.
in that offense.
And how cooperative are the other governments in the world in helping with those kinds of cases?
Well, it depends on the victim.
Right.
Our government system turns around and says, do we have a good prosecutorial element here?
Right.
Or is it a weak case?
Right.
A lot of it depends on the victim.
I see.
And how the DAs
Makes
approach the idea that, yes, it's a good case. We really want this person back.
Right.
Especially in child molestation cases.
So your emphasis goes generally, you put more effort into those cases that the prosecutors want because you get the support with that.
Well, I put forth the same effort. My company puts forth the same effort whether they want them back or not.
Well, that makes sense.
Because we have a client.
Right.
And that's the insurance company and the bail.
Right. Right.
So we have to do our due diligence no matter what goes on.
That's true. That's true. Now, once you've identified where a defendant is, in a foreign country, what do you do?
I can't tell you that. I'm gonna leave that part alone.
You have to keep some of the secrets. I without question. But at some point, you have to communicate with law enforcement. With law enforcement,
always.
Yeah, and what you do in many ways is dependent upon what the prosecutor decides to do.
Yes.
Right. So go ahead.
Yeah. How would you say that with COVID, it's affected your role?
Oh, well, COVID has stopped a lot of the investigations abroad, and it's even stopped it domestically because you can't knock at a door, you can't do what you normally would do. Defendants or those fugitives are always maxed up, so you can't get a positive identification when you're sitting on surveillance for 12 hours. It has impacted the investigative aspect of what we do, yes.
That's interesting. Has it affected the kinds of cases that are?
No, I haven't seen the change in cases. Like I said before, we're seeing a spike in child molestation and sex crimes.
Right.
Not so much property crimes or anything else like this right now.
Is it affect? Go ahead.
Are these predominantly U.S. citizens, or these are ones that are across state lines?
Well, I would say 30% are U.S. citizens that commit crimes and then they think they could go to another country. The other 70% are nationals that were here. Either they've applied for their residencies or green cards or what have you, commit a crime, and then they go back. It depends on their birth. Right.
Right. And different countries have different citizenship and immigration rules, and sometimes they conflict with each other.
Yes, they do.
I had cases where Iran considers everyone citizens even when they didn't want to be. And it's, sometimes can cause issues like that. Yeah.
And believe me, we don't have the right to put our hands on people abroad.
Right.
We just don't do those type of things. We rely on our assets, our communications with our partners there.
Right.
And we just let them do the work.
Right.
Well,
right.
when you say the term put your hands on, does that mean literally physically apprehend someone, whereas
we don't have the arrest power in other countries?
The issuance of the extradition warrant is the thing that gives the arrest power, and that can take years to get.
Yes, it gives the country the ability to arrest.
Right. So there's a gap in time where really nobody can arrest a defendant until the countries have worked it out amongst themselves.
That's correct.
I've sometimes said, there's a chain of desks that the file goes through, and
it's unbelievable. The Office of International Affairs and the host, the country that you're applying for, everything goes through D.C.
Right.
And it comes back out.
Right.
But it starts with our DAs here.
Right.
That request what they need.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes they know the intricacies of the case, and sometimes having a defendant leave the country, maybe the DA is satisfied with that.
That's correct.
But
it doesn't do much for our client.
Well, if they elect not to extradite, you
Right,
know, you
it
are
does.
able to get
Right.
an exoneration
Right.
if you've properly found and identified the defendant.
That's correct.
You know, that's one of the things that we did in the 90s that's worked really well is we've incentivized California bail agents to at least identify people all over the world and then allow those formal processes to take place when the government chooses, but to allow the families to not pay the penalty of the forfeiture if the government is not going to bring them back.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Well, John,
Yeah.
with that one forfeiture that we had way back when in Fresno,
Uh-huh.
we had found the defendant,
Right.
and then the DA. Can you you think that's something to discuss here? Or
Sure. Because it makes
Yeah.
a difference with the relationship with the bond. You know, I mean, just take back for a circumstance to explain to people what's happening here a little bit. You know, you've got a defendant who you have pledged. In that case, it was $400,000 that you're going to pay the court if they run, and it was a drug charge, if I remember, and he was found in Mexico, and the DA wanted to bring him back was the issue in that case, but then were unable to do so, and it ended up having to be paid. Sometimes the DA is unable to make a choice on whether or not to extradite because the long arm of the law can't grab them. The person has either gone to a place where there's no extradition treaties, or the extradition treaty doesn't cover it, or some other circumstance where the DA would like to prosecute but is unable to. And it was those dynamics that we dealt with in that case, and it turned out they had to pay the $400,000. You know, it doesn't work every time.
Well, it depends on the charge. A lot of countries don't have our actual charge. Example,
Right.
vehicle manslaughter. Somebody's DUI, they kill somebody.
Right.
There are some countries that do not have that type of charge. So then our government has to turn around and reposition themselves in charge under another. And correct me if I'm wrong. Is that correct?
So that can happen sometimes, right? I know that specific case was a real problem in Mexico because you'd have a vehicular manslaughter here that drunk driving, and Mexico didn't consider it a crime for a long time. It was an accident, right?
Correct.
And so, you know, how they define crimes and how we define crimes. Now, the newer extradition treaties will allow a lot of flexibility with that, but older treaties like Mexico list specific crimes that they'll extradite for rather than for any felony.
That's correct.
Have you ever worked with Korea?
Well, we have an associate that works with Korea. Yes.
Yeah. Bringing them back from Korea was really interesting because, you know, just the differences in their criminal law and the California law, and they didn't quite fit, but we were able to get a few extraditions back from there.
That's correct.
Ryan, which do you like better? Did you like being an MP or a criminal investigator, or do you like where you're at currently? Where do you see yourself going next? You going to run for office?
Probably I'm going to pass myself away because I'm getting to the point in my life that sitting in a car for 6 and 10 hours is not part of my DNA anymore.
I understand.
I wear compression socks and things like this. I got a lot of young guys that work with me now, and educating them on what I've learned, because there's no rabbis that teach us anything anymore. I'm here to tell you that there's nobody willing to put themselves out there any longer. It's very prevalent in law enforcement.
Right.
That's why the young guys get in trouble, because the older people are all retiring right now. They don't like the way the politics are going.
Right.
And I'd rather walk away whole than to sit there and fight for something that I believe in. Yeah.
So they're losing the experience of the older generations.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Things are
Do you
changing.
have words of wisdom that you would perhaps some of our listeners are looking to be in a military or in the police or in a future fugitive recovery? Any sound wisdom that you can impart without getting politically involved?
Well, I was always told and taught these two terms: what's real and what's relevant. Everything else is bullshit.
Right.
What's real and what's relevant. You can work in an investigation, and there's a lot of investigations that you pick up different parts, and you can get yourself sucked into the things that aren't real and the things that aren't relevant and go off on a tangent.
Right.
And I was taught by the best that taught me Hey, Ryan, just stay focused. What's real and what's relevant, and you'll catch the person.
That's a good point. Because, there's got to be a lot of different perspectives that are being thrown around by people that are in crisis, and a lot of people just trying, in that circumstance to try and propagandize you.
Well, like I always say, it's their job to run. It's my job to catch you. It's indemnitors, people. It's their job to deceive. And nobody likes law enforcement. Nobody likes people of authority any longer.
Right.
So you try to communicate on their level. I'm not above you. I'm not below you. I'm right here with you.
Right.
And you have to use, as I say, you have to use your boca. That's Spanish for mouth. And you have to learn how to use this before you go to your hip or do anything crazy. If you don't know how to communicate with people, this is not the job for you.
Well, that's a good point. What do you think? Like, there's a certain mindset, I think, in the public of what a fugitive recovery person is, the bounty hunter. There's sort of mythologies that are out there. I understand.
Bounty hunter, I don't like that word. Okay.
I understand. Well, why don't you like that word?
It gives a unlawful, if that's the word, unlawful title to you.
I see.
That we're able to do anything and get away with it, able to kick in doors and get away with it. We don't care about things. And the bounty hunter mindset came from back in the 1800s.
Right. Who were you telling me about earlier, your hero?
Yeah, Bass Reeves was my hero.
Yes.
So
what was his name again?
Bass Reeves. He was the first black deputy U.S. Marshal.
And it worked in the Oklahoma Territory.
Reeves, R-E-E-S?
No, R-E-E-V-E-S.
Bass Reeves. Okay.
Yeah.
That's one of my little heroes in life.
Yeah. Would you call him a bounty hunter?
No.
No?
Well, he was chasing slaves. You got to remember, their crimes when a slave would run,
right? Their
crimes were chasing slaves back then,
right?
And for a dollar value,
right?
Everybody had a dollar value on them,
right?
It's funny how things change, but our people have a dollar value on their head too,
right?
And that's the bond. So but just the term bounty hunter doesn't set well because I'm not that guy.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of misinterpretations from the public on what you do, what bail does, and I think a lot of those are wrapped around a lot of the mythologies that are in Hollywood over bounty hunters and bail, and I mean it's all over Star Wars.
That's correct.
Our
occupation, and I do call this an occupation. Our occupation has been used, abused, and built into something that it's really not. Meaning it's not Hollywood.
Right.
When we knock at a door, we could be killed. We lost. I lost a partner of mine without mentioning his name.
Right.
Going into a door. This is real action.
Right.
People do not like to go to jail.
Right.
And if a person is running, that's the first step. He doesn't want to go to jail. Otherwise, he would have handled his business.
Right.
So,
right. So you have to absorb that, and it could be anything,
From the misdemeanor, I'll tell you this: the misdemeanors have been the most physical crimes. I mean, when we have to put hands on somebody,
really,
is a guy that has a misdemeanor offense.
Really,
it's so funny. Your felonies, your murders, your sex offenders, your rapists. 9 times out of 10, they don't put up a fight.
Interesting.
But it's the misdemeanor guys.
Well, because they know they're caught and
Right.
and that it's serious. It's maybe the misdemeanor guys haven't processed it yet.
Well, they should go to court.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all we do is chase bench warrants.
Right.
And law enforcement doesn't do it.
Well, explain that. Why doesn't law enforcement do it?
Well, they don't have the manpower. And I think we spoke about how many bench warrants are out there right now.
Right.
California-wide, how many?
There's hundreds of thousands of bench warrants out there. And something that our friend Topo Padilla pointed out many years ago, if you look at those bench warrants and how many of them are released on bail, it's a tiny percentage.
That's correct.
Of those.
The only time a bench warrant gets caught based on if a guy commits another crime,
right,
and there's a Remy warrant, the detectives put a warrant on him for that crime, or subsequently when a black and white gets behind him.
Right.
And they run his plates and, yeah, you got a warrant.
Well, how do you find the cooperation with California law enforcement when you are looking for the fugitives? Are they generally cooperative with you?
It all depends how you communicate.
I see.
If you communicate like you're entitled, you're not entitled. Law enforcement, there's a term, may assist you.
Right.
They don't have to assist you.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
It's one of those things, and you know that as well as I do. That word may,
right,
but they don't have to. So you just communicate with them like if you were on the job with them. Right.
Well, and a bench warrant requires them to catch the defendant. So at least you're in an alignment of interest. You're both just trying to bring the defendant back to the judge. But in your experience, the California law enforcement is not really set up to pursue the bench warrants.
That's correct. There's too many of them out there. They have another job to do. They have fugitive units.
Right.
But their fugitive units are designed to do other things.
Well, give me an example.
Well, they fugitive units are designed to chase pretty much Remy warrants, those warrants that come from the detectives that put a case on somebody.
I see.
Bench warrants are subsequently, the judge turns around and puts his gavel down, and based on the crime, he didn't show up for court.
So a bench warrant's issued by a judge when you fail to appear.
Yes.
And the Ramey warrant is issued by an investigator on probable cause for an arrest warrant. And that person with the Ramey warrant has not been in custody before.
Well, a lot of times,
or many times. Yeah. Or on that case, on that charge, right? It's issued and then they're arrested on the case subsequently. Bench warrants, they've already been arrested and generally have a case filed, and the defendant has failed to appear in front of the judge.
That's correct.
Yeah, and it's the bench warrants that there's just not the bail. The bail agents have done more of the fugitive recovery of bench warrants. Have you noticed any difference now in the last few years with the $0 bail from COVID, or some of the excessive bail problems that they'd had earlier with the Humphreys decision? Has it changed the mix of people that you have released on bail versus just have bench warrants?
Well, that goes to the retail side. There's two parts of bail.
Sure.
I'm on the back end.
Of course.
I'm not going to talk about the retail side.
No.
Retail does what they need to do to survive.
Of course.
And how they do that, I do know, but I'm not going to reveal that.
Well, but I wasn't so much talking about the bail agents as it is the court themselves setting bail.
Oh.
The $0 setting bail.
Correct.
The difference in the mix of defendants have you noticed a difference in the mix of defendants that are running based on the different COVID policies of minimizing the amount of bail?
No. I haven't seen it.
Okay.
From the court side. That's a question that you have to ask the retail guys, because those are the guys that actually get zero bail involved, and they may be posting a bond and then they release them OR for that crime, things of this nature.
Right.
We see the back end of it. So those things aren't that important to us on who gets bailed out. It's when they get that bench warrant and my client turns around and says, I need to get this guy. Right.
And so the client in this circumstance for you is the bail agent, generally.
The bail agent, the surety, those are our two clients.
So to bring up a recent case in the news in Tulare County, two illegal immigrants from Washington are picked up with 150,000 fentanyl pills. Their initial bail is on the bail schedule is something, it's in the millions of dollars, but they're released as low risk so there's no bail agent involved with that bench warrant. Is anybody going to call you to search for those guys?
Well, I hope somebody calls me. I need a judge to sign off on it, quite naturally, but we would be happy to help. Those are drug cases, as they say, are a dime a dozen. But because of fentanyl being how this thing is blowing up,
right?
I can't see how the courts let them get out, like that, without a bail.
Well, obviously that was a mistake.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think they've acknowledged that. But the difference when you don't have when you let them out on government pretrial, as opposed to having security that's placed, you don't have anybody that calls you.
That's correct.
And so the society doesn't benefit from the fugitive recovery, and nobody is actively looking for those bench warrants. Do those people who are out on bench warrants often continue to commit crimes?
Yes, they do. I would say at least 30 to 40% do go back in. Depends on the areas that they live in.
Right.
People up north may not. People that live on a farm may not. They just stuck there. People in the inner cities, certain ethnicities may have that pattern going.
Right.
There's a lot of different factors with that.
Sure. And some of it is, there's organized crime, that they come in and out of. You would think that, the two defendants we were discussing in Tulare, that the whatever organization is supplying the fentanyl that they gave them will not be happy with losing those. But there's no bail indemnitor to give information on them because there was no bail bond that was issued.
It's funny that you mentioned there's no information. It's just like law enforcement. When law enforcement chases somebody, they go to their computer, they see a name, they run this, they run that. On our side, sometimes we have that much more, and we've been called to give them a hand on things before.
Sure.
We see a lot of information. If the retail bail agent does his job, he collects a lot of data.
Right.
Friends, family, friends, family. There's so much information.
Locations,
that they get.
Sure.
Emails, Facebook accounts, things of this nature.
Right.
That helps in identifying, because I don't believe a person has the intention to run right off the bat.
Right.
So when you do a bail application, you're pretty much honest.
Right.
Unless you're a gypsy.
That's a different dynamic.
But you're pretty well honest.
Right.
And you write down all your indemnitors are there, 3 or 4 people that say, hey, you're a good person, you're a wholesome person.
Right.
And they give their information out.
Right.
Now, when a person goes into custody and gets arrested, you may just have that one person closest, your next of kin.
Right.
Just in case something happens to you while you're in custody.
Right.
But we get a lot of information
that the police don't on those arrests. That's interesting.
That's correct.
I think an interesting thing that we should backtrack a little bit on is before somebody becomes a fugitive, the various warrants. You had hit on a Ramey warrant, which is, let's say it's an investigator that has probable cause that gets permission by a judge. Do we want to talk about perhaps search warrants or arrest warrants or bench warrants, all of which could lead up to it?
Well, we don't do search warrants. Okay. We can apply for let's say, example, like it's on TV, so I'm not gonna say. You have a phone number that you want to go after.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do a search warrant. You have to get a judge to approve that to the telephone people.
Right.
That's a warrant. But we normally don't do search warrants. We're a people person. Once we see the body, we don't look for drugs. We don't look for anything else like this. We don't care about the crime at that cell, unless it's sitting right there in plain view.
Well, I think where I'm going with what I had asked primarily is you are a fugitive recovery and you don't go after anybody unless they are recognized by the court and the judge or the magistrate to be a fugitive.
That's correct.
And that fugitive status usually occurs because of a bench warrant, most likely, but it could be because they did not have their butt in the bench when they're in court, hence it's a bench warrant, or they didn't do their probation, or they didn't pay their fees, and so they end up getting a bench warrant.
Correct.
Also, there are arrest warrants. What would you say is the difference between the two?
Well, the person that law enforcement, the DAs, they do an arrest warrant, like you said, it's probable cause.
Right.
They had no probable cause to issue an arrest warrant.
Right.
Now,
and normally that'll be done before a bail bond that's how you get somebody in custody to be bailed out.
That's correct. So to answer your question, that we don't deal with arrest warrants. We deal with bench warrants, but it's kind of similar, but it's not.
Yeah.
Where it comes from, who gives you the authority to arrest? The courts.
You can also get a grand jury warrant. You could be,
Right.
you could issue a grand jury could issue a warrant to remand someone in custody.
Correct.
But pretty much, it's the majority of the cases are either you've never been arrested, and so this is the document that entitles the police to arrest you. Some arrests are fresh charges just because the police officer saw it.
Right.
But if they didn't see it, they have to go through the process
That's
of getting the. I don't know why it's called a Ramey warrant.
I don't know.
There was a case,
Probably
most
a
likely,
case, yeah.
Ramey versus something, and
Exactly.
Huh?
but just to reiterate to listeners, Ryan here does not go gung ho, and he's not out there for the free world to do whatever he wants. His actions are permitted by the court and the judge or the magistrate that effectuated this action. So a bounty hunter is very different from a
I'm not a
fugitive.
bounty hunter. I keep on telling you that.
That's why he's saying it's different.
saying-
Exactly.
Oh,
They're
okay.
very different.
Okay.
Ryan
Thank
is
you.
a fugitive recovery agent. So when you're thinking about bail bonds, bail bondsmen don't hire bounty hunters. They hire fugitive recovery agents.
And I just want to
Thank you,
reiterate that connection directly to the judge, with the bench warrant and these bail bonds. I mean, you really are doing, just exactly what those who we have elected and appointed to handle these matters, to have a great deal of discretion. Judges have a great deal of discretion.
I'm doing God's work.
Yeah, you really are, to bring them back, because it's a respect to the court. You can't have a legitimate criminal justice system. You can't have that safety without bringing someone before the judge.
That's correct.
Now, I think that once they're there as an officer of the court and as a citizen, I have political interest in what they're doing, but you can't have any effective system unless they're there.
That's correct. And that's what the courts want. We need you to be in front of us.
Absolutely.
Some judges
What,
get some.
habeas corpus?
Huh?
Or John, isn't that habeas corpus? Like you can't have court without having a body physically present, or is it? I said that wrong before. Why don't you correct me?
Yeah, habeas corpus is where's the body. So
Where's the body?
it's to get somebody out of custody that the government is improperly holding. I'm not sure that I know the Latin for what we're for the other part that you asked.
Well,
Okay.
we're on the side where a judge. We've seen this before, where a guy may just have a $30,000 warrant,
Right,
and he misses court.
right.
Next thing you know, that $30 warrant goes into $1 million bench warrant or no bail at all,
For sure.
based on the judge, how he feels that day, because sometimes things happen.
Sure.
And a case could get prolonged for a long period of time in our judicial system, and the judge is only human. Hey, I want this guy back here. He knows that if he issues an arrest warrant, a bench warrant,
Right.
that for another $30,000, if he gets caught, he just got to bail back out and not come to court.
That's a good point. So when you say a bench warrant and an amount of money, that's another concept of bail that people don't generally know. Talk about that a little bit more. How is that done?
When a judge authorizes a bench warrant, his initial charge may only be $30,000
Right.
based on the scale.
Right. For the criminal charges, the bail schedule.
Based on the bail schedule. That's
Right.
correct. But then that bench warrant could go to no bail, which means that you don't get a bail if you get put in custody. You have to go before that judge again.
Right.
Or it could be $1 million.
Right.
It could be. It's never less than the actual first part of the crime.
I quite frankly think that every bench warrant should be $1 million or more. Because, it just means that if you're going to fail to appear, that you'd have to either post a real substantial security or go to the court, which would then be required to set a reasonable bail at that point, but there's it doesn't let the revolving door keep going.
The reasonable bail was set in the beginning.
Exactly.
And then you don't show up. The judge says, hey, I got this case in front of me. I want him to show back up to answer for this case.
But so, for example, on the Tulare case that we brought up earlier, the bench warrant that the judge issued was over $2 million, something like $2 million for the bench warrant, right?
Should have been a no bail.
Perhaps it should have been a no bail,
because a no bail will get a person held until he goes before the judge.
But if you had a $2 million bail bond that went along with that bench warrant, then on a case that's that large, you would use the potential payment of that penalty to help fund the investigation to bring him back.
That's correct.
Correct? If there's no bail bond that's attached to that bench warrant, that just means that they'll be held on $2 million of bail if they're caught again.
If they're caught again.
It doesn't send anybody out to catch them if there's not a bail bond attached.
That's correct. You're absolutely right. Sean?
But would that be fair to have a $2 million bail and somebody could afford it and somebody couldn't afford it, and then that person that couldn't afford it stays in custody?
Well, that's why you have to have the court hearing within, I think, 48 court hours to be able to have a judge make those decisions. Under the Humphreys decision, the court is required to hold you on bail for that period of time, but to set a no bail bench warrant or a really high bench warrant just ensures that if you're caught again, that you go before a judge before being released.
And so what is the Humphreys, you called it?
Yes. So California had been setting bail excessively for many years. The California Supreme Court, in a case called Humphreys, recently set up more of the standards that the courts have to go through to make sure that unaffordable bail is not set for people that come before the court.
And who's the determining factor to what it would be affordable bail or what wouldn't be affordable bail?
Yeah, it's a contested hearing. The defendants can produce their evidence. The public defenders are the ones who brought the Humphreys case, and they often would. The DA can produce his evidence, and if the DA, if it's a serious case, you can be held on bail that you can't afford, depending on what the number of charges are. You just have to go through a contested hearing first to make sure that it's fair and people aren't just being held on excessive bail. But that period of time between the arrest on a bench warrant and until you go to the court again, that's what that bench warrant amount of bail is set for. Is the amount that you'd have to post to not go in front of a judge again. So in the if someone's arrested on those, or it also affects if you're arrested outside the jurisdiction. So if you're arrested in Nevada on a $2 million warrant, that shows the bail you have to place in Nevada, to get out of custody before you're brought back to California. So it's useful to have the high bench warrants, but it's not nearly as useful as when you don't have a bail bond.
Well, don't forget, if he's caught in Nevada or any other state, he can get another bail, a fugitive bail.
That's true too.
And we've seen that before, where a bail agent says, "Oh, he's caught," but he bailed out again.
What is a fugitive bail?
It's up to the judge of that arresting county to post or to basically say what that bail is going to be.
We had a fugitive. We had a number of fugitive bails where, let's say, one example is a defendant had been transporting prescription drugs across state lines and actually owned a medical company, but didn't have the permission to do that. So he needed to have a bond. We also had a potential fugitive warrant for someone in Nevada that ultimately ended up being extradited back to Ventura, and then we were able to work with him. Actually, no, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
He was held in custody in Ventura, and extradited to Vegas, and then we had to post his bond in Vegas,
correct,
because he had a large gambling marker that caught up to him.
That's one of the things. That is another little thing that people don't come across very. There is a separate bail bond for a fugitive bond.
That's right.
And it's sort of the inverse of what happens when you're going out and bounty hunting. Let's say you've got someone in Nevada that's come to California, and there's a Nevada bench warrant. If he gets arrested in California, then California just holds him for an extradition hearing. There's something called the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act, where states have to agree with each other, and you have to have the defendant identified. So a fugitive bond doesn't guarantee the appearance for the underlying case.
No.
It guarantees the appearance for the extradition hearing.
That's correct.
And then if they prove that there was a crime and you were the person that they wanted, then they officially transport you back.
If that other state doesn't answer an appropriate time period, that's what happens.
That's true too. They could just be released.
They could be released.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, but you can bail out for the time period while the extradition hearing is being held.
That's correct.
I just saw Thor with my kids, 3 of them last night.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's great. I highly recommend it. But as I'm sitting here and I'm looking at both of you kind of remind me a little bit of Thor, and
And who am
and
I?
that you're helping to enforce, both of you specifically are helping to enforce the power of the court.
Absolutely.
Yes, we are.
Absolutely. If you go back into the history, it's the Latin for it is quietam. You would act on behalf of the court. In those cases, they're mostly to get money. But that's good English law that the English king would set up a policy and then have his loyal subjects enforce it against other local agents that weren't following the king's policy. That is a long English tradition for noblemen and the aristocrats. That's essentially, they were part of the process. So there's a lot of that with the English law that bail is based on as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we'd like to cover? Any fun stories or any experiences? Any more words of wisdom?
I want to hear what you thought of Django Unchained. That's my that's my movie for this episode.
Well, Hollywood and what's his name that made that movie?
Was that Denzel?
No.
Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
But who was the actor?
Oh, that was
Jamie Foxx.
Jamie Foxx.
Oh gosh, it was Fox. I'm sorry.
Yes, that's one of those movies that I enjoyed watching.
Yes.
And I enjoyed what they were doing.
Right.
And, some things were put in another perspective. But to answer your question, Sean, could he be the Doc and could I be Django? I don't think so. I don't think so.
No. I'm on some desk somewhere,
right.
Talking to someone on the phone. I'm not getting out and getting that messy. No, thank you.
Well, remember, they were chasing crimes.
They were.
They weren't chasing slaves. They were chasing crimes, and those crimes were committed all throughout. And there was a dollar value on top.
There was a dollar value,
involved.
Right, and it's I call it an alignment of incentives. There's people talk about conflicts of interest, but there's alignments of interest as well. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those old English law policies that a lot of American government was based on was all about aligning interests and getting the defendant's family to align with the interests of the judge to make sure that we can have a person who's appearing in court so that justice can be done. I think that's an important alignment of interest.
It is.
And I think that's something that has been broken by the government pretrial on a lot of the COVID policies. And we really need to get California's criminal justice system back in balance.
That's correct.
It's out of balance right now.
It is. Did I answer your question, Sean?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So I think this has been a good episode. We've had a lot of good conversations. I really appreciate you being with us.
And I don't reveal secrets.
You didn't reveal any secrets?
I didn't reveal not one
But
secret.
you still have a lot of them.
I have a lot of them. That's correct.
It was fun having you on.
I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys inviting me. Anytime I could bring my guys up, they'll love this. They would love to be on TV.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. We should get a whole group of your guys here and make a.
Now those guys would tell war stories.
Yeah.
You want to hear war stories? You talk to each individual investigator. He's got a war story.
That's a great idea, Sullivan. Let's get that scheduled and let's get a war story episode. Those are always fun.
Thank you for having me.
This has been the Bailed Out Podcast. I'm Sean and John, and thank you, Ryan. Sign, listen, subscribe, rate, review podcast for YouTube or Apple Podcasts or whatever. If you do want to hear fun stories, we got words of wisdom from Ryan Smalls, but stay tuned and perhaps we'll have some. Ryan, what's the name of your organization? Would you like to?
U.S. Fugitive Service International.
U.S. Fugitive Service International. That's and how do people find you?
On the web, we're posting on Facebook all of our. We don't post our fugitives, but we don't post our arrests. We post a lot of times if we're looking for somebody for rewards, things of this nature. It's www.usfugitivesvc.com.
www.usfugitivesvc.com.
Correct.
That's good. And yeah, do you take reports for people with for fugitive?
Yes, we do.
That's excellent.
We're on the web. Good.
No,
We're on the web, and if you go to that website, you'll see our recent capture in Mexico, things of this nature. But we don't promote. We don't boast about what we do.
Right.
You know, if you just happen to hit our web and you're on there, it's because we're looking for you.
Could be. That's right. You don't have to find Ryan. Ryan will find you.
John, you're Turning Leaf.
Turning Leaf. Turningleafnetwork.org. I like the simple names, but it made me have a more complex domain. But yes, turningleafnetwork.org.
And then maybe on one of these future podcasts, we'll talk about the military housing for helping Turning Leaf thrive. That'll be a fun one.
We got a good Marine here. He would.
I'm interested in knowing about that.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Absolutely. Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.